It's time for Somebody Knows Something as we have the Elgin Cold Case Unit. And Matt Vartainian, the detective, is going to be here after our 9:30 break. This podcast length is about 23 minutes, so I really have to get it started to try to finish it by our 9:30 break. It's 9:06. So let's do that. This is episode 10 of Somebody Knows Something. In this episode, the detectives wrap up Karen's cold case investigation. They detail the final steps taken and share what they believe most likely happened to Karen on that fateful night of April the 16th, 1983. This is Somebody Knows Something. It's the Elgin Police Department's cold case unit closing the Karen Scheepers case. And the detective, Matt Vartainian, will join me shortly. Let's listen in.
This podcast is based on information sourced primarily from police and media reports, but certain names and other identifying details may have been changed or altered for privacy and security reasons. While the events and cases discussed are based on real investigations, some aspects may be simplified for time and for narrative purposes. Voice actors have been used to read from statements or documents. All information presented is intended solely to inform and raise awareness. Hosts may discuss theories regarding the cases examined in this podcast, but such discussions are not intended to and should not be considered by the listener to be legal conclusions. All persons discussed are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Listener discretion is advised.
This is Chief Anna Lally. Welcome to Somebody Knows Something, a podcast from the Elgin Police Department's Cold Case Unit. In this podcast, we will shed new light on cold cases in the city of Elgin by sharing untold details and by encouraging anyone with information to come forward. You will come along with real cold case detectives as they investigate active cold cases in real time and seek justice for the victims and closure for their families. We believe that the Elgin Police Department and our community can work together to bring closure to cold cases because we know that in these cases, somebody knows something.
Hello and welcome to Somebody Knows Something, the Elgin Police Department Cold Case Podcast. My name is Detective Andrew Hougton.
And I'm Detective Matt Vartainian.
Over our last two episodes, we chronicled our search of the Fox River, where we located and recovered Karen's 1980 Toyota Celica, and even more importantly, Karen. We also spoke with chaos divers about the exceptional work that they did on Karen's case and that they are continuing to do for families all around the country.
I know for both of us, the past few weeks have been emotional, and we appreciate the support that the community has given to the Elgin Police Department and to us, but even more so to Karen and her family. Finding Karen and her car was one big step in this investigation, but it was not the end of this case.
That's right. Finding Karen's car was a huge piece of this puzzle, and then recovering her remains was another giant leap forward for us. But over the past few weeks, we've continued to meet with forensic experts, Toyota experts, and even some new witnesses. We answered the question, where is Karen, on March 24th, but now we want to answer the question, what happened to Karen Scheepers?
Like you said, Andrew, we now have two giant pieces of evidence that we did not have when we started this investigation. We have Karen's 1980 Toyota Celica, and we have Karen. Both required us to bring in experts to try to help figure out what happened to Karen on April 16th of 1983. But before we get into that, let's talk about a new tip that came in just after we found Karen and her car.
A former employee from First Car named Jane, who no longer lives in Illinois, reached out to us when she learned about our investigation. Jane worked in a different department than Karen, but she was actually at PM Bentley's on April 15th and never spoke to the police. Because she was in a different department than Karen, her name didn't appear on any of our lists of employees for the party. Jane unknowingly had a really big piece to the puzzle that helped us put the night's events into perspective even more.
Well, I didn't per se work with Karen in her department, but we all considered First Card as family. So she was very, very near and dear to me. She was always so friendly and kind, and I would interact with her whenever I would see her, and she was just a wonderful person. She had gotten a promotion, and I was invited to attend because it was like 5 minutes away from where I lived with my first husband.
Yeah.
And so we went. And we went in, we had a good time. Karen did do the hula hoop contest.
Yeah.
And I had noticed her out in the very beginning of the bar, the vestibule that you go into before you actually go into the bar.
Yeah.
She was at the payphone, and she was crying. And when she had gotten done, I asked her, Karen, are you okay? And she said no, she was sad because her boyfriend wouldn't come out and party with her.
You had mentioned before that you had seen her in the parking lot later in the night. Could you describe that for us?
Well, she was in the parking lot to get into her car, and I could tell that she was still upset, and I just said to her, Karen, please be careful going home. Make sure that you're safe, and, I'd see her at the next day of business.
Yeah.
And she smiled and waved at me and said, thank you.
Jane went on to describe Karen's car to us, and she was certain that Karen was alone when she got into the car. And then she saw Karen turn south on Illinois Route 25.
We now have an independent witness who says she actually saw Karen leave in her car alone that night. I have to say that this type of witness information is what we have been looking for during our investigation this entire time. When she heard that Karen's car was found during our search, she simply chose to contact us because she wanted to be sure we had her information. Like we have always said, no tip is too small, and this one was certainly a big one. We now feel even more confident that Karen did leave the bar on her own based on this new tip. And we spoke with some other people associated with the tipster who confirmed her information, so we have confidence knowing that this tip is valid. Figuring out that Karen did leave on her own really paints a much richer picture for this case for us and what happened that night.
Yeah, it shows us that she left in her car and was alone, which is huge. But that isn't all we've learned over the past few weeks. Like we said, the two biggest new pieces of evidence that we have in this case are Karen's remains and Karen's car. Matt, I think we should start by talking about what Karen was able to tell us about what happened to her 42 years ago. When you work any death investigation, it is important to remember that the decedent, in this case Karen, is a person. We always strive to be as respectful as possible, but we also want to assess everything so that we can give answers to the family. That's why the coroner's office conducts autopsies and exams after many death investigations that we work.
Thankfully, through the exceptional work of chaos divers, we were able to recover extensive skeletal remains, including dental remains. Because we recovered dental remains, this allowed the forensic odontologist to identify Karen in days rather than in weeks.
I just have to say that the Kane County Coroner's Office treated Karen with the utmost care, respect, and dignity, just like they do on every case. They also helped us bring on multiple experts to review the case and examine Karen's remains, so that we could try to provide as many answers as we could. We really do appreciate the care they showed, the expertise with which they do their work, and the number of resources they brought in for us. It is through their thorough work that we were able to tell several things about what happened to Karen.
After the coroner's office was able to conclusively say that the remains we recovered were Karen, and only Karen's, we were able to learn a few more things. For one, Karen was able to tell us where she was located inside her car. We now know that all of Karen's remains were located in the front seat area of the passenger compartment of her vehicle, consistent with her driving the vehicle prior to the car entering the Fox River. Based on this, Karen was able to tell us that she was alone in her car and in the front seat area when both she and the car entered the river.
Also, just because we were able to identify Karen didn't mean the Kane County Coroner's Office was done. The Kane County Medical Examiner, Dr. Marta Helenowski, reviewed Karen's remains, and she performed an autopsy. Then the Coroner's Office went the extra mile. They brought in a forensic anthropologist from Northwestern University, Dr. Erin Waxenbaum. She assessed and documented every single bone that we recovered, and confirmed that the human remains belonged to only one person, Karen.
Most importantly, all the experts agreed that there were no significant structural injuries, breaks, gunshot wounds, trauma, or anything else suspicious on any of Karen's remains. The other new piece of evidence that we now have is Karen's car. That, like Karen, can tell us information that is vital to understanding what happened to Karen. First, the physical location of the car is very important. We have had a number of people asking if Karen could have driven off the boat ramp at Slade Avenue. And we can say to that, the answer is no, she did not. The car is several hundred feet north of there, which is upstream. So, the car absolutely did not enter the Fox River at the Slade Avenue boat ramp.
Also, in talking to chaos divers, they told us that Karen's car, especially in high water, could have been carried upwards of a mile, maybe even further, if all the windows were up and the tires were inflated. We now know that all 4 side windows and the windshield were intact when Mike McFerrin and the Elgin Police Department dove and checked the vehicle prior to us removing it on March 25th.
Andrew, we had actually talked extensively about the car and the windows even before we did the search. We expected that the windows would be up in Karen's car because it was unseasonably cold and because Karen, well, at least to our knowledge, was not a smoker. So she wouldn't have had a window down to smoke or anything like that. Now, because it was cold, it would also make sense that her windows would have been up as she drove from PM Bentley's to Elgin. So we know going into the search that it was likely that Karen's car could have traveled a significant distance downstream if it did go into the Fox River.
Yeah, and we actually measured the distance between Duncan Avenue, just north of I-90, to the site where Karen's car was actually located. From the furthest point north on Duncan, where the river is extremely close to the roadway, to the location near Slade Avenue, is about 1.5 miles. So we can safely say it is entirely possible that Karen could have entered the river in that general area and the car could have been carried a little over 1 mile before finally settling where we found it. Additionally, the location where her car was resting was kind of along the edge of a deep spot that then got more shallow. It's possible that the car settling in this deeper area just simply couldn't be pushed by the current to get out of there. And we know the same area is where we found a lot of other cars.
Yes, plus that area where we had found Karen's car was the same general area where we found 2 additional vehicles and other debris. That spot in the river seems to be where a lot of larger debris was deposited by the current. Things like pipe, larger tires, and other types of debris.
We also know that the area of Trout Park and the area of North Spring Street could potentially be entry points to the river that we didn't really discuss in our prior episodes. Trout Park is just south of I-90 and could be a location where Karen could have turned or lost control or maybe entered the river around the I-90 corridor area. Similarly, North Spring Street, just north of River Bluff Road, is close to Slade Avenue, where Karen's car was found. That road is currently a gated roadway, but in the 1980s it was a steep brick roadway which was open to the public. A number of former police officers and other people from the community have reached out to us and told us that that road would be slick, it would be somewhere that maybe people would drive if they were just kind of going to clear their head, and it was in close proximity to Karen's house, just a few blocks northwest of there. If Karen had decided to drive around a bit before going home, maybe just to kind of clear her head, people suggested that North Spring Street spot is a spot that she could have gone in the river. Trout Park is also another potential entry point, like we said. Needless to say, there are several points where she could have entered the river, upstream from Slade Avenue. Matt, we will likely never know the exact one, but we do feel like the Duncan Avenue area close to the river is the most likely possible location, and there are others as well.
In addition to the location of the car, we also physically needed to assess the vehicle body and the mechanics of Karen's Toyota Celica to determine what information we could gather about that car prior to it entering the river. Again, we needed to bring in experts, so we ended up bringing in 2 different groups. The first was the Elgin Police Department's traffic crash reconstruction team, and the second was a Toyota master technician from Elgin Toyota who had over 30 years of experience. We want to thank Elgin Toyota for helping us assess Karen's car and for providing a detailed report on the vehicle that was immensely helpful in giving us some new, very valuable information.
First, let's start with the Elgin Police Department crash team. The team did not observe any major dents or impacts on the body of the car that would suggest it was struck by another vehicle, run off the roadway, or that Karen struck a deer or tree or other large object. In fact, they noted that while the tires were deflated, the 4 rims were basically pristine, with no obvious dents or other damage on any of the rims. Plus, we know all the windows were intact and there was no penetration to the passenger compartment that would suggest any type of impact. At this point, we feel like we can rule out any major crash or impact involving Karen's vehicle. We should also note that the rear hatch window being broken could be explained by some tree debris and other logs that the diver, Mike McFerrin, had to move off of the vehicle. There were no impacts on the rear bumper, the lights, or anywhere else that would show some kind of impact from behind to break that window. Overall, the car was actually in remarkably good physical condition for being submerged for almost 42 years.
The Elgin Police Department Traffic Crash Reconstruction Team's report and review was very helpful. But we both feel that our Toyota Master Technician's report, which documented the car similarly to the Elgin Police Department's Traffic Crash Reconstruction Team, regarding the lack of body damage, provided the most insight into what happened to Karen. He also noted upon inspection that the 2 front tires had been deflated. When they went to put air in those tires, they actually held air after all this time. That helps us to know that it is that much more likely that Karen's car could have floated a longer distance. And it shows that those tires were not damaged, even after 42 years. These details were important to understanding how Karen's car could have floated further into the river, and to also confirm that there were no major impacts involving her car. But it was his mechanical report that really gives us the best picture of what happened on April 16th of 1983.
The technician documented a few other very important mechanical facts about the car. The first was that the key was in the ignition and in the on position. This indicates that Karen's car was running and on when it entered the Fox River.
The second was that Karen's vehicle, which had a 5-speed manual transmission, was in 4th gear and seized in that position, likely due to the extensive time in the water. This indicates that Karen was driving her vehicle at a speed consistent with 4th gear prior to the car entering the Fox River. The technician also noted that the front brake lines were fully intact and that while the rear brake line hose was broken, he did not find that to be suspicious. In fact, the rear brake hose was separated from the metal block due to extensive corrosion on the crimp fitting, and the front brake line showed consistent corrosion in the exact same locations. Basically, the brake line did not appear to have been tampered with or cut or anything in that manner.
The final mechanical detail about Karen's car is something that we both feel is very, very significant. The emergency brake in the center of the vehicle was pulled completely up and rusted in that position, indicating that the occupant pulled the emergency brake prior to the vehicle entering the river.
Because of several factors, including the amount of time that has passed since her death and the fact that we don't have 100% of Karen's remains, the Kane County Coroner's Office can't 100% say what happened to cause Karen's death. So from a medical and legal standpoint, her death has been classified as undetermined. That being said, both Andrew and I have some opinions that we would like to provide as we wrap up this criminal investigation.
From the beginning of this case, our goal has always been to find Karen and provide answers to her friends and her family. On March 24th of 2025, we found her car in the Fox River. And on March 25th, we recovered both Karen and her vehicle from the river. Now, after 42 years, we believe that we can answer what we think most likely happened to Karen Scheepers in the early morning hours of April 16th, 1983.
First, we now know from witness statements that Karen left PM Bentley's on April 16th of 1983 in the early morning hours, alone, in her canary yellow 1980 Toyota Celica with red accent stripes. The windows were up, and we know it would have been common for her to take Duncan Avenue to drive back to Elgin. We also know it was dark, cold, and slick, and we now know that the Fox River and other bodies of water along her route were severely flooded. It is entirely possible that Karen's Toyota could have traveled in the river from the area of Duncan Avenue to its final resting place.
Based on the expert assessments of Karen's Toyota, we know that Karen was traveling at a speed consistent with her vehicle being in 4th gear. On the low end, we've been able to estimate that in the low to mid 20 mile an hour range, and on the high end, it could be significantly faster than that. We also now know that at some point, the emergency brake was pulled in the car for some reason. Matt and I both also want to note that just because Karen was at a bar and driving home does not mean that she was impaired. From a number of the people we've spoken with, Karen was not a heavy drinker, and she was very responsible. And literally no one who was at the bar described her as being drunk or stumbling or acting drunk, even into the late evening hours. While it is possible that she was impaired or slightly impaired, it's just as likely that she was tired, given it was such a late hour, and she was up early on April 15th to go to work. It's also possible that, regardless of being tired or any type of impairment, the weather conditions and road conditions were simply a major contributing factor in a crash that could have happened regardless. Additionally, if she did drive into standing water, Karen's car sits very low to the ground, and it wouldn't take much water to lift her car up from the pavement and cause her to begin drifting out into the river.
The last thing that we also know is that based on the assessments of several forensic experts, we believe that Karen Scheepers suffered no significant structural injuries to any of her skeletal remains. She wasn't shot or beaten or anything that would cause any alarm based on the condition of her remains that we had recovered and that our multiple experts assessed for this case. And she was found in the front seat of her vehicle.
At this point, based on our extensive investigation, we also know Karen was alone in her car when it entered the Fox River at some location north of Slade Avenue. There was essentially no major body damage to the car or to the mechanics of the car. The lights were intact. The windows were intact, even the tires were intact. That, along with the information that the car was in fourth gear and the emergency brake was pulled, we both strongly feel that options like suicide or someone pushing Karen's car into the river are eliminated from this case. All in all, based on the totality of the circumstances, both Matt and I believe that Karen's death was simply a very tragic accident.
Next episode will be the final episode for this season. While we may have a bonus episode or additional information to release over the summer, we plan to wrap up Season 1 by sitting back down with Karen's close friends and family to hear their reflections on the past few months and to hear what bringing Karen home has meant to them. I am sure it will be an emotional episode, but Karen's friends and family deserve to be heard one more time. Please join us next time as we remember Karen Lee Scheepers here on Somebody Knows Something.
If you or anyone you know has information about this case or any other cold case in Elgin, please contact the Elgin Police Department cold case email at coldcasetips@elginil.gov or the cold case tip line at 847-289-COLD. You can also review cold case information on the Elgin Police Department's Transparency Hub by going to elginil.gov and navigating to the Elgin Police Department's Transparency Hub, where every cold case homicide and missing persons case is listed with photographs and information about each case.
All right, so there you have it. It's episode 10, Somebody Knows Something. As we continue our coverage of the Karen Scheepers case, we're just about wrapping it up, and Detective Matt Vartainian is here, and we're going to take this bottom of the hour news break here, and then we'll come back and talk to Matt. And if you have any questions, please give us a call at 847-931-1410. You can make a comment or ask a question on YouTube at WRMN Radio on YouTube or on the Image 360 information line, 505-926-1410, as we start to put this case to rest. It's 9:30 on WRMN.
With your 1410 WRMN News Flash, I'm Sean Kernan. Brought to you by Cintas. Kane County Treasurer Chris Lawson has announced that 2024 real estate tax bills will be sent to residents on or before May 1st. The first payment is due June 2nd, followed by a second on September 2nd. Naperville's annual Memorial Day Parade is gearing up for another year, and organizers are calling on groups to join the tradition. Marching bands, scout troops, veterans organizations, and other community groups have until Thursday afternoon to register at napervillememorialdayparade.org. Kane County Treasurer Chris Lawson has announced that 2024 real estate tax bills will be sent to residents on or before May 1st. The first payment is due June 2nd, followed by a second on September 2nd. With your 1410 WRMN News Flash, I'm Sean Kernan. With your 1410 WRMN News Flash, I'm Sean Curdan.
Here's Comedians and Sketchers Getting Comfortable, presented by Hands-Free Skechers Slip-Ins.
Hey, I'm Bobby Slayton, and I'm here with my pal, comedian, and Skechers ambassador, Mr. Howie Mandel.
Why did it take so long to invent something as amazing as slip-ins? I know it seems simple, but it took Skechers to invent a better pair of shoes.
Yep, with Skechers Slip-ins, you just step it and go. You don't have to touch your shoes. And by the way, Slip-ins are for the whole family, men, women, and kids. In all your favorite Skechers styles, find Skechers Slip-ins at a Skechers store, Skechers.com, or wherever stylish footwear is sold.
Are you having trouble hearing? Hearing loss can devastate the quality of your life. Now, there's an affordable fix for you or your loved one. Rated the best hearing aids of 2025 by Forbes Health, Audion Hearing has the highest quality hearing aids at the lowest prices, starting at just $98 a pair.
I actually like them better than my old $5,000 hearing aids.
I could not believe how my hearing and life changed.
Join over 1 million happy customers by going to audionhearing.com. That's AUDIEN hearing.com.
At Britain's Touchless Car Wash, they know life gets busy. That's why they're here 24/7 to keep your car looking spotless, fast, and easy. Their advanced brush-free wash technology delivers a sparkling clean without a single scratch, because they treat your car like it's their own. Here's the best part. Right now, you can get a free car wash just for joining their text club. It's simple. Just text BRITT to 30400, and your first wash is on them. Britain's Touchless Car Wash has two convenient locations, 1923 Larkin Avenue in Elgin and 555 Willow in West Dundee. They're proud to keep your car clean while giving back to our community. Text BRITT to 30400. That's BRITT to 30400. Now for your free car wash, and see why Britain's Touchless Car Wash is the fast, gentle, and reliable choice.
This is Sarah Silver with your Fox Valley forecast. Today, mostly cloudy with a high near 65 and a chance of rain showers after 3 p.m. Tonight, rain showers likely before midnight, then showers and thunderstorms. Cloudy with a low around 52. Looking ahead to tomorrow, showers and thunderstorms with a high near 66. Currently, it is 52 and overcast. I'm Sarah Silver on the Talk of the Town, WRMN.
One of life's greatest mysteries has finally been solved.
Who let the dogs out? Spruce!
It's Spruce, the new hard-working, worry-free weed and grass killer that's safe for use around people and pets. When used as directed, spray the leaves for visible results in just 1 hour and dead weeds in just 1 day. You spray, they play. Weeds die by the next day. Find Spruce wherever weed killers are sold.
All right, 9:35 here at WRMN. Welcome back to the show. It's the WRMN Community Hour on this Wednesday morning, the 30th of April, as we continue to talk about the Karen Scheepers case. And we welcome in Detective Matt Vartainian, flying solo today here in the studio. You and Andrew have been quite the team. You've seen a lot of each other over the last,
yes, we have.
How long? Year now? Well, you worked together even before you became part of the cold case unit, right?
Yeah, we would overlap on different cases, you know, in our general investigations division. If there was a shooting or an armed robbery or something like that, I was in the gang unit. He was working major crimes, so there would be overlap there where we would work together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can take phone calls if you have any questions, thoughts, based on listening to this entire series, and you're still like, why was this never answered? Or I still wonder about this. But you guys have tried to cover every possible nook and cranny possible to so that no questions could remain after all of this. And I think that maybe the case that we just heard in the last half hour was answered some of the final questions, or at least in you guys' investigation it did. Because just because Karen and her car were lifted from the Fox River doesn't necessarily mean nobody else was involved, or an accident didn't take place, or somebody didn't force her car into the river, or whatever. So those answers still needed to be found, and based on some of what's happened on the side, besides just lifting her remains in the car from the river, you think you've come to some conclusions with that, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's correct. Based on everything that we know now, after waiting to have the vehicle inspected by a Toyota master technician, a gentleman that had 30 years experience, and he actually has a car that's similar to Karen's, which I think helps to, just have an extra set of eyes with the expertise of that individual. And then waiting on the coroner's, reports with everything too. We have come to the conclusion that it looks like it was an unfortunate accident based on everything that we have. We'll never know for certain with everything. We'll never know exactly where her car went in the river, but we can have a pretty good idea and a pretty good understanding of that night and the events that led, up to what happened as well.
Yeah. So, what were some of the most important things, I guess, that finalized your belief that Karen left the bar, drove herself, heading towards home, and eventually somehow found herself driving, maybe not driving into the river, but her car being sucked into the river, or whatever took place?
Yeah.
Some of the final details that brought you to this conclusion.
Yeah, as we talked about on episode 10, there's three important things that I think kind of helped to paint the picture of that night. One, we have a lady that called after we found the car. So she actually worked at Karen's business. She wasn't in her department, so she was never originally interviewed by anybody. When law enforcement first started to look into everything, they tend to focus on the people that were in her direct department, not the entire, company, if you will. So this lady was actually at the bar that night, and she reported to us that she actually saw Karen leave that night. She was outside in the parking lot with her husband. They observed Karen to leave solo in her car and to drive south on 25 towards Elgin.
Yeah.
So, and that was one thing that was important to us. And then that's consistent with the remains that were found in the car. We know that it was just Karen. It was Karen alone. There was not another set of remains or anything like that. That was actually Karen that was in the car. So that was a very important piece of information to tie into what we know about that night and the conditions that were there, the flood stage of the river, the possibility of standing water being on Duncan based on other people that we've talked to, in the last couple months with this whole case. Then having the car and having the remains are the other two big pieces of that. We had the car, so we wanted to make sure that we were as thorough as possible to make sure that we were being respectful to Karen and to her family. Why not inspect the vehicle? We have to do that. So that was an important piece. So we have this individual from Toyota that comes out, looks at the vehicle. Some of the key findings that he looks at is the ignition is in the on position. There was a key that was in, the ignition, which is important. The vehicle, the gearbox, so it was a 5-speed manual transmission. It was in 4th gear. And you described it as being seized, probably because of the time that it was in the water, but it was in 4th gear. So I don't have a ton of experience with manual transmission cars, but I've driven a few, and I know 4th gear is one of the higher gears, right? Like you're not 5 to 10 miles an hour.
When I heard that last night when I was watching the podcast, I was thinking 40 to 45 miles an hour is generally about your 4th gear range.
Yes.
You usually switch to 4th gear when you're at about 35, I think, in an old manual car like that.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned on the podcast, or somebody did, that 25 would be a possibility, but it would be hard to be in 25 miles an hour in 4th gear.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree with you. I would think somewhere, 20, 25 is too low, 35, 40, 45 miles per hour, which if you're ever driving down Duncan Avenue, I mean, people are moving on there, that's a good spot where you can go fast, right? And then on top of that, we also have the emergency brake, which would be located in, just to the right of the driver, was in the up or the engaged position as well. So, you think about it, if you're driving and let's say there's something down the road that, catches you off guard, standing water, an animal, avoiding another car, if you will, you press your brake, first of all, you put your foot on the brake. Well, maybe you're not stopping quick enough, so you pull the emergency brake as an extra added, measure. So we asked the technician and we asked our accident reconstructionists from Elgin as well, if that's something that could just inadvertently be pulled up, like if it's sitting in the river and it was down the whole time.
Yeah,
is that
would it go up on its own or whatever at some point?
Yeah, and the general consensus is that's very hard to do that. Not to say that it can't happen, but we can't rule out that possibility. But when you look at everything in the totality of everything that we know about it, where the vehicle was, it was in the car was on, it was in fourth gear, where her remains were recovered in the vehicle, and then that being up, that helps to further paint the picture that it could be some type of tragic accident that could have happened to her. Yeah. So, and then we talk about the remains as well. So we had several different forensic specialists look at the remains to make sure that we were thorough in that too. And there's nothing that says there's any type of foul play or trauma or, a gunshot wound or anything like that to the remains. And we talked a little bit too. The coroner will rule it undetermined because we don't have additional remains. We just have skeletal remains. So, if there was a medical event that happened that caused her to go into the river, we'll never know that. We can never say that for certain. So that just kind of helps to paint the picture of everything that we know that there was nothing tragic that happened with her remains in the vehicle.
If she was, I know you only have pretty much bones after 40 years or whatever, but had she, let's just say, had she been shot or stabbed or something, would the bones indicate for sure that would have happened? If someone gets stabbed, does it affect your bones necessarily?
Yeah, in my experience, and obviously depends on where a stab wound would be, but in my experience with some stabbings, you do make it down to the bone. You make it down to ribs. If it's something in the neck area, you're going to see some type of indication that there is some type of like stab wound or something like that. And that's why we wanted to make sure that we had people look at that. And we had asked that question. There's nothing that shows that at all. And the other thing, if there was foul play that was involved with her, right? It would be very hard for somebody to get that car in the river while it's in fourth gear, right? You would think it would be in neutral and they push the car and maybe they leave a door open. And, keep in mind when we found the vehicle, the doors were closed, the windows were up. So that's further indication to us that we don't think it was foul play at all.
Yeah. Are there any questions for Matt Vartainian, detective with us here today, as we continue to close the Karen Scheepers case here? You can give us a call at 847-931-1410. That's 847-931-1410. We have Frank Collingborn checking in on YouTube, and he says, great job, Matt. If she entered the river off of Duncan Avenue, was there any damage to her car from hitting the railroad tracks before entering the river?
Yeah, so and thank you, Frank, for the comment. With that, when we looked at it, the rims were intact. So we noticed that right off the bat. The tires were deflated, but they were actually able to still inflate the tires after 42 years. That amazes me.
I can't believe that.
Yeah. So Chaos Divers had told us that when a car goes into the river, you're going to have air that's in the tires. You're going to have air in the passenger compartment. That night, we know that it was colder, so her windows were up. We don't know of anything about her being a smoker or anything else that would indicate that her windows would be rolled down. So generally, when a car will go in the river, it'll kind of, bob and float a little bit, and then it'll want to get pulled down by the engine, which is the heavier part of the car. And then eventually, even if it does go underneath water, the car's going to want to flip upside down. So we know that there was air in the tires. We know that there was air in the passenger compartment with the windows being closed. But that was one of the first things that we saw was when we looked at it, there was no damage to the tires or anything like that. The front tires, and you can see that on the videos when the car is being removed, that there's some indentation of the tires, which is indicative of some of the debris that was located on the vehicle, like a log, or something that would be resting on the car, but nothing to the rims on the car, which is very interesting. We know that back when this was all going down, there was some aerial, searches that were done by helicopter to see if there was any, vehicle in a wooded area or in the water or anything else like that. But there's no reports of anything where they see a debris field of a car that, showing a trail of it going into the river. So that's why we think that Duncan area, is a good spot because it was so close to the water. Even we drove it the other day and it's still very, very close. And it's not as high as what we think the water level was that night.
Yeah. The levels of the Fox River have gone down over the years. And take away the fact that for different reasons, I guess, for the dam, the changes in what's happened with the Fox River over the years, but also less rain.
Yes.
The last few years. So if it had been really cold, and it was almost at flood stage. Was it at actual flood stage at that time? It was really close enough to where the water could almost be getting to Duncan Avenue, basically.
Yeah.
At that
So
time, right?
Yep. The reports were that a day or two before that, it was at the highest level that it had been at. So that night, we're going with the theory that the water was still very high. It wasn't receding. We had also had reports that, just because the river floods, that also would mean that other bodies of water maybe not attached to it, the water table, goes up because of that. So, and then we've also talked to people that have told us that, yeah, I remember driving down Duncan Avenue and there would be standing water in that area too. So that's a good place that we think it could have happened. We also visited up on North Spring Street, the old brick road that kind of goes around the water treatment area that's right there. Maybe she did leave the bar and she made it down Duncan Avenue. And maybe she was upset because of the argument that she had with Terry. So she decided to drive and just take a cool down. Maybe she went in somewhere there. We're not sure. But we're leaning on the expertise of Chaos Divers too, with them telling us how far a car that size could travel underwater over 42 years. And it could be upwards of a mile, So that's why just another piece that we kind of add on to it.
Yeah. 946 here at WRMN. We have a phone call or two for Detective Matt Vartainian, who's joining us from the Elgin Police Department as we continue to wrap up the Karen Sheepers case. I think today's episode kind of puts some final closure to it for those questions that maybe were still unanswered. Let's take this call from Mr. John Prigge. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Matt. I just want to say, you hate to use the word congratulations, but I think to say thank you is probably more appropriate.
Thank you.
What you guys went through instead of, high-fiving and everything else. Yeah. It's just a thanks. But I have two questions. When this is all done, and it might be all done now, but I mean, does anyone come and make a recommendation so that something like this cannot happen again, or at least be tougher to do, whether it means fencing, barricades, anything like that? Because I think a lot of people say, okay, we handled it.
Yeah.
But now let's look at the next page.
Yeah.
Does any of that get to anybody?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll address everything that happened 3 years ago when the fisherman did find her car and the fire department found out about it. And, what I'll say about that is I'm glad that our city, the fire department, the police department got out in front of that and put that out there. Because I can only imagine if that information wasn't talked about for a couple of weeks and all of a sudden it comes out. Out of all that unfortunate situation, policies have changed where they will be diving on cars now. So if there's other cars that are found in the river like that, there's going to be an identification that's made, right? And I think through this process, we will lean on other, groups like Chaos Divers to help us out. There's a couple other cases that we've talked to them about where there's some possibility that there could be some bodies of water that are searched. So I think that's very important. I know that on the Duncan Avenue side over there is fencing that is put up off of the Max McGraw side of it. The river side, that's an interesting question because I don't know how they would address that. But we did talk about the other two vehicles that we did find that week that we found Karen's car. So DNR knows about those. Whether or not they want to remove them, if it's already past the environmental impact, stage of the vehicle, or if they're just fish habitats, and that's how Chaos Divers had described those cars to us. But to me, those are still some questions that you have, like what are those cars? Whose cars are those? Are you even able to identify those cars, right? Because if we found Karen's car in the river after 42 years, are there other ones that are out there? But now that we have done this search of the Fox River, we know based on what we have that week that there's no other cars there except the other two that we found.
Okay, so then as far as preventing this, if there was another situation like that, there's really no way to prevent a car from entering the river today, right?
Yeah, and I think what makes me feel more comfortable if that happens nowadays is the technology that we have. We have cell phone records, we have cameras, everywhere, right? There's city cameras, there's flock cameras, there's all these other different types of cameras that are out there where you can track where vehicles are. Vehicle records, so you have iPass records, cell phone records, but then you also have social media too, right? So in a lot of the cases that we work nowadays, like I do cell phone mapping on the side as well, you get records back from a T-Mobile or Verizon and you're able to map those records and that gives you some clear direction of where a car would go. So my point is if this case were to happen nowadays, we wouldn't just start wandering aimlessly and say, oh, well, we have no idea what haystack we're looking for. We can actually direct ourselves to that specific haystack and start looking, more specifically. And then, we had talked about this too. We always knew we were going to search the bodies of water, because when you knew where Karen was that night, confirmed at the bar and where she lived, that was always the thing that stuck out to Andrew and I, is there's so many bodies of water around there, including the Fox River. So we knew what was going to happen. It was just a matter of getting the right team up here and the coordination. And we didn't want to do it in January when the river was iced over and the conditions were poor. But I don't know if you could ever prevent a car going in. I mean, I know that there's still cars that happen, they still go in the water to this day.
Yeah. Did you say there were 2 cars still remaining in the Fox River in that general area?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So just right in that area of the Slade Avenue boat launch, north of Karen's car, I would describe it, I would say 1,000 feet, but that's probably not accurate. But in that general area, that part of the river is deep. It's roughly 6 to 9 feet deep. And then as you continue to go south of there, so south of the Slade boat launch, it gets a little shallower. So our thought, and then after speaking with Chaos Divers about this too, if the car landed there and then it gets shallower as it goes south and the current wants to pull it, it might not be able to pull it out of that area because of how deep it is. So it goes from deep to shallow, and it might not be able to get into the shallow water because it's like a little channel that's right there.
Yeah. I heard you mention DNR. Are they the ones responsible for removing cars from our portion of the Fox River? This may be getting into like a whole network of branches of whose responsibility is it to get those other cars out of there? Is it the city? Is it the county? DNR? Do you know?
Yeah, from my experience with this case, they would be the ones that hold the jurisdiction of the river, but it also depends on, if they can identify, if it's a case of Elgin. So like with Karen's, case, we knew that was our case. So that becomes us. So that was our responsibility to do that. Now we've coordinated with them, and we've given them the GPS coordinates of the locations of those 2 vehicles, and it'll ultimately be up to what they want to do with them, if anything.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, John.
Well, great. Thanks for the answers. I appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for the time.
Sure, John. Thanks for calling.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, John, checking in, 9:53, about 5 minutes left with Detective Matt today. We have at least one more phone call. I think the second call might not be about this, but yeah, it's not. So we only have one phone call left. But at the moment, let's check in with our friend David Tees. Good morning, David.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good morning.
Good, man. How you doing?
Good. Hey, as a theory, back in the 70s and 80s on the Slade Street area where the boat ramp is, back in those days, that was like a big party spot for a lot of people. I was a junior in high school and hung out down there too. And do you guys actually think that she might have stopped by there, or see if anybody was down there hanging out, or just to see who was down there before she went home, and then probably went right into the boat ramp? I mean, that was like I said, big, huge party spot for everybody back in the day.
Yeah, our theory with that is we don't think the car went in there, because where we located it from the boat launch would be north of there. So the theory would be if she did go in there, we would think the car would be south, but obviously we can't officially say that. We know that at some point the car, we're going with the theory that it did travel over 42 years underwater. So we think it eventually settled there. Now, we did discover when we pulled the car out, and you might even see it on some of the video, there's fish hooks and fishing line all over the car. So I'm sure somebody at some point had hooked that car. We don't know if she did hang out in that area or she took a drive. We've had other people tell us that they have actually gone down there and taken a little drive, because it's, you go down North Spring Street, on that brick road that kind of curves back to the west and the south, and it is kind of scenic as it goes down there, but some of the road has changed also. So we don't know if she went, down there first. We don't think she went in there, though.
But the river being that high and above flood stage, the currents can actually pull, I think, anybody or a car in different directions. Yeah. That's why, because when I was down there, far west side of the river and a little bit north of the boat ramp, kind of like indicated to me like it got caught up in the currents and got pulled that way.
Sure.
That's my theory.
Yeah. I mean, and it totally could have happened. We're going with what we know, who we've talked to that night, the conditions of the vehicle. So we were, trying to put all that together, and we feel pretty safe that it didn't go in, at Slade. We don't obviously know that for certain, but our theory is that it went in somewhere north of there.
All right. Well, thank you. You guys did an amazing job. Elgin PD is one of the best police departments, I think, in the nation. So you guys keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye.
9:56 here at WRMN. One of the things that is hard, I think, for you guys, for anybody, as you hear about things, you create what you think happened in your mind.
Yeah.
And you want to believe that. And maybe you're right more times than not. But you've had to keep that imagination out of the investigation and had to cover all the corners of it all the way through. As I imagine what happened here, I can see Karen drifting down Duncan, and it's late at night, and she's tired, and I don't know, maybe she's had a few drinks, and it's maybe a little hard to see, maybe kind of dark. She's cruising in fourth gear, and so maybe she's doing 45 miles an hour and hits that pocket of water that's maybe a big puddle on Duncan or something, and kind of gets swept to the right. And it almost sounds like, and with her car being so low to the ground as it was, it may have crapped out. It may have just died.
Yeah.
And so there was no reason for her to ever try to downshift or anything like that. And so maybe as a last-ditch desperate effort, she pulled the parking brake to see if that would work.
Could have been, yeah.
You'd try anything at that point if you see yourself drifting into the water, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we were talking with one of her good friends, Denise, this week. And the way that I sum this whole thing up is, we have this incredible responsibility to be a good steward of Karen and get the right answers for her and for the family. And you have to, like you said, you have to be objective in your thinking. You can't have that confirmation bias like we talked about, months ago where, we're going to go with the theory of foul play and then fit our evidence around that. That's not the case. No, we have a lot more answers than we did 2 months ago. So we're looking at that, and we still have to be objective in that. We have a better idea of what we think happened, and we have a pretty good idea of some things that we think didn't happen too. But you still don't know. That's the part of it. And I truly do wish that we could get every answer for, Karen's family. And they understand that we can't. And we will continue to try to do that if more things come up. But we have a good idea of what we think happened that night.
So now we move on, right, to the next case.
Yes,
but
sir.
we do have on, as far as the podcast go, we're going to do one more episode in 2 weeks. Is that right?
Yeah, so we want to go back, and the next episode is going to be talking with the family and friends and coworkers just to get some reflections on how the last couple months have been for them, because we think that's very important to do. That's what we should be doing about that, and that'll give us, that'll be the end of it. That'll be the wrap up for the podcast.
And then we'll have you back here in 2 weeks, and we can, at that point, talk about that final podcast and then talk about what comes next, right?
Yep, that's correct.
So, well, thanks for everything. Thanks for coming in again today. It's always great talking to you, and amazingly insightful, and just, I don't know, people just are fascinated by things like this.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, thank you for having me.
yeah, thanks a lot. All right, so it's Matt Vartainian joining us today, and that's going to wrap up the show this morning. Matt's in next with his Out to Lunch program, and I'll talk to you tomorrow morning. Susie C. joins me at 6 a.m. Enjoy the sunshine on a Thursday.